Welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories, or I will come for you. I'd like to thank Angel64 for joining the Curator's Disciples. Your viewership is very much appreciated. If anyone would like early access to my latest stories and an ad-free listening experience, consider becoming one of the Curator's Disciples. The link is in the description below. Story number 1, The Child Broker, by the Curator. I never thought my life would spiral into such darkness. My name is Kevin Monroe, and I used to be one of those people who believed that if you shined a bright enough light on corruption, it would wither away. I thought the truth had power, that if you exposed the rot at the core of society, you could force change, make things better. I've been a journalist for over 20 years, dedicating my life to uncovering the stories no one else wanted to touch. But nothing in my career, nothing in my life, prepared me for what I found when I started digging into the dark web. I've always had a knack for finding stories. My father was a journalist too, a war correspondent who spent more time in conflict zones than he did at home. He taught me everything I know about this job. The importance of asking the right questions, of digging deeper when everyone else stops. But he also warned me about the dangers of getting too close, of letting the story consume you. I never really understood what he meant until I got caught up in this nightmare. It all started with a tip, one of those vague, cryptic messages you get from sources who don't want to be traced. I was working on a piece about missing children, something that had been nagging at me for months. The numbers didn't add up. There were too many cases where kids just vanished without a trace, and the police reports were always the same. No leads, no suspects, nothing to go on. It didn't sit right with me, so I started looking into it. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that these weren't just random disappearances. There was a pattern, a connection between the missing children and some very powerful people. At first, it was just a hunch, a gut feeling I couldn't shake. But then I started finding evidence, small things, easily overlooked. But when you put them together, they painted a terrifying picture. There were whispers about a site on the dark web called the Child Broker, a place where the rich and powerful could buy and sell children like they were commodities. It sounded too horrible to be true, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized there was something there, something real. I've been chasing stories like this my whole life. I was one of the first reporters on the scene during the Enron scandal, and I played a key role in uncovering the truth behind the financial collapse of 2008. I've also faced death threats. I thought I was invincible, that nothing could touch me or my family. I was wrong. My work has always been my life. My wife, Sarah, left me years ago because I couldn't let go of the job. I was always chasing the next big story, always on the phone, always traveling. She wanted a husband who was present, who could be there for her and our daughter, Lily. But I couldn't be that man. The truth was too important. I told myself I was doing it for them, that by exposing corruption, I was making the world a safer place for my family. But in reality, I was addicted to the thrill of the chase, the rush of uncovering something no one else could see. Lily was my world, the one bright spot in my life after the divorce. She's 13 now, smart as a whip, and just as stubborn as her old man. She didn't care about the stories I was chasing or the awards I'd won. She just wanted her dad. I tried to be there for her as much as I could, but the job always came first. I missed her school plays, her soccer games, and countless birthdays because I was always off on some lead, chasing down some new piece of the puzzle. The day I got the tip about the child broker was just like any other. I was buried in paperwork, trying to connect the dots between a series of seemingly unrelated disappearances. The tip came in the form of an encrypted email, sent from an address I didn't recognize. The message was short, just a few lines of text, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Check the dark web, the child broker. Follow the money. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the screen. The dark web was a place I rarely ventured, even as an investigative journalist. I'd heard about the child broker before, in hushed whispers and conspiracy forums. It was supposed to be a myth. A boogeyman used to scare people away from the dark web. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together. The missing children, the powerful people with connections to the cases. It all pointed to something bigger. My hands shook as I set up the necessary software to access the dark web. I felt like I was crossing a line, stepping into a world I couldn't come back from. But I had to know. I had to find out if this was real. Navigating the dark web is like walking through a minefield. One wrong click, and you could end up on a site that would make your skin crawl, or worse, attract the attention of the wrong people. I kept my head down, moving cautiously, following the breadcrumbs left by my source. It didn't take long to find it. The child broker. The site was hidden behind layers of encryption, accessible only to those with the right credentials. The homepage was stark, with nothing but a single image of a child's silhouette and a login prompt. My heart pounded as I entered the code from the email, half expecting it not to work. But it did. The screen flickered, and I was in. The site was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was clean, professional, almost clinical in its presentation. No garish colors or flashing ads. Just a simple interface with a list of names, ages, and brief descriptions. Each child had a profile, complete with photos, background information, and a future guarantee. The guarantees were the worst part. They promised that the child would be groomed, educated, and conditioned to fulfill specific roles, all at the behest of the buyer. There were children being sold to become politicians, corporate moguls, even trained assassins. And the buyers? They were some of the most powerful people in the world. Billionaires, politicians, criminal masterminds. I felt sick, but I couldn't look away. This was it. This was the story that would change everything. But I didn't know then that I was already in too deep. That the more I dug, the more I put myself and my daughter in danger. The child broker wasn't just a story. It was a machine, a well-oiled operation with the power to destroy anyone who tried to stand in its way. I knew I had to be careful. My instinct screamed at me to stop, to back off before I got in too deep. But I was too far gone. The images of those children, their blank stares, the clinical descriptions of their futures. It haunted me. I couldn't let it go. I had to dig deeper. For days, I lived in a haze, barely eating, barely sleeping, consumed by the dark web. I spent every waking moment tracking down leads, piecing together the network behind the child broker. I found connections to shell companies, offshore accounts, and powerful figures in politics and business. It was a global operation, well-funded and meticulously organized. The deeper I went, the more convinced I became that this was the story of a lifetime. A story that could blow the lid off the world's darkest secrets. But something changed. I started noticing things. Small, unsettling things that made my skin crawl. It began with the phone calls. At first, they were just hang-ups. Calls that ended as soon as I answered. But then, I started hearing breathing on the other end. A low, steady breath that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to trace the calls, but they always led to dead ends. Whoever was watching me, they knew how to cover their tracks. Then there were the emails. My inbox filled with messages from anonymous senders, some offering me money to drop the story, others threatening to expose my past if I didn't stop digging. The threats were personal, too personal. They knew things about me, things no one else should know. My daughter's schedule, the route I took to work, even the name of the diner where I always grabbed coffee. I wasn't dealing with amateurs. These people were professionals, and they were watching my every move. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a scare tactic, a way to rattle me. But deep down, I knew better. This was a warning, a message that I was getting too close. One night, I was working late at my office, poring over the latest batch of documents I had managed to scrape from the dark web. It was around midnight when I heard a noise, a soft click, like a door being opened. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, listening. The building was supposed to be empty. My editor had gone home hours ago, and the cleaning crew wouldn't be in until morning. I got up from my desk, my palms sweaty, and moved towards the door. The office was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. I could feel my pulse quicken as I reached for the doorknob, half expecting someone to be standing on the other side. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I stepped out, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing, just the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I walked down the hall, checking each office, each room, but they were all empty. When I reached the main entrance, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I knew I had locked it when I came in. Someone had been here, someone who didn't want me to know they had been watching. I went back to my office, locking the door behind me, and tried to calm my nerves. I sat back at my desk, staring at the screen, the documents in front of me suddenly blurring together. Why hadn't they done anything? Why just watch? Then it hit me. They were waiting. They were waiting for me to make a mistake, to slip up. They wanted me to know they were there, that they were in control. The realization sent a chill down my spine. The next day, I decided to take a step back. I went to my editor, Tom, and told him everything about the site, the children, the threats. I expected him to be shocked, maybe even horrified, but instead he just sat there, listening quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, letting out a long sigh. "Kevin," he said slowly, "I think you need to let this one go." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "What are you talking about? We can't just ignore this, Tom. We have a responsibility." "I know," he cut me off, his voice firm. "But you're putting yourself in danger. This story, it's bigger than anything we've ever dealt with. These people aren't playing games. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their operation, and I don't want to see you get hurt. Or worse." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tom had always been supportive, always pushing me to dig deeper, to get the story no one else could. But now, he was telling me to back off, to walk away from the biggest story of my career. It didn't make sense. "Tom, this could bring down some of the most powerful people in the world," I argued. "We can't just walk away. Think about those kids." "I am thinking about them," he interrupted, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "But you have to understand, this isn't just about the story anymore. It's about you, your daughter. I've been doing this a long time, Kevin, and I've seen what happens to people who get too close to the fire. They get burned, and I don't want that for you." I felt a wave of frustration and anger well up inside me. This was my chance to make a real difference. to expose the rot at the core of our society. But as I looked into Tom's eyes, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. He was scared, genuinely scared for me. And that scared me too. I left his office without another word, my mind in turmoil. I couldn't just drop it, not now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, that the noose was tightening around my neck. I went home that night, trying to focus on Lily, to be the dad she needed me to be. But I couldn't. My mind kept drifting back to the case, to the children on that site. I knew I had to do something, but I was running out of time. The next day, I received another message. This time, it was a video. The screen flickered, and then I saw her. Lily. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. I wanted to reach through the screen and hold her. But then, the camera panned, and I saw them. A man and a woman, standing a few feet away, watching her. The man glanced at his watch, then nodded to the woman. She started walking towards Lily, her movements slow, deliberate. I felt a surge of panic as she got closer, my breath catching in my throat. But just as she reached out to touch Lily's shoulder, the screen went black. I stared at the monitor, my hands trembling. The message was clear. They had her. They were watching her, and they could take her anytime they wanted. I felt sick, my mind racing. How had they gotten so close? How had they known? I had been so careful, so sure that I could protect her. But now, I realized I was out of my depth. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a war, and I was losing. Then, one night, I received the final blow. Another email, this one with a single link. I clicked on it, my heart in my throat. The page loaded slowly, the screen flickering as it revealed its contents. It was an auction, and at the top of the list, her face staring back at me, was Lily. My daughter, my little girl, was up for sale. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The auction was set to go live in just a few hours, and the bids were already pouring in. I watched in horror as the numbers climbed higher and higher, the buyers fighting over her like she was a piece of meat. I tried everything, calling the police, reaching out to contacts, even hacking into the site. But nothing worked. They were always one step ahead, always out of reach. In a desperate attempt to save her, I started selling everything I owned. The house, the car, the savings I had put away for Lily's college fund. But it wasn't enough. No matter how much I raised, there was always someone with deeper pockets, someone willing to pay more. I watched as the final minutes ticked down, my heart breaking with every passing second. The bids kept climbing, higher and higher, until finally the screen froze. The auction was over. Lily was gone. I collapsed into my chair, tears streaming down my face. I had failed. I had lost everything. My career, my life, my daughter, and there was nothing I could do. I don't remember much of what happened after the auction ended. It's all a blur. Hours, maybe days, where I just sat in my office, staring at the screen, my mind refusing to accept what had just happened. Lily was gone. The world had moved on, and I was left alone in the darkness. The first coherent thought that broke through the fog was a simple one. I had to get her back. I didn't care what it took. I would burn the world down to find her. I was done being the passive observer, the journalist gathering facts and trying to expose the truth. This was war, and I was ready to fight. I started by combing through every contact I had, calling in every favor. I knew people in law enforcement, hackers, even a few who had ties to the underworld. I didn't care about the risks anymore. My career, My reputation, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting Lily back. But every lead I chased turned into a dead end. Every contact I reached out to was either too scared to help or had mysteriously disappeared. It was as if the world was closing in on me, the walls tightening around my already suffocating reality. One night, I was sitting at my desk, a bottle of whiskey in hand, when my phone buzzed. It was an anonymous number. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, dreading what might come next. With shaking hands, I answered the call. Kevin Monroe. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly, but there was a coldness to it that made my blood run cold. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "You've been causing quite a stir," the voice continued, ignoring my question. "We've been watching you, Kevin. You're determined, I'll give you that. But this isn't a game you can win." "Where's my daughter?" I spat out, gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "What have you done with her?" There was a pause, a moment of silence that seemed to stretch on forever. "She's safe, for now. But that could change, depending on your actions. We're willing to offer you a deal, Kevin." "A deal?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter was in the hands of these monsters, and they were talking about deals. "Yes," the voice replied smoothly. "You've been a thorn in our side, but we're willing to let this go. You walk away, you drop your investigation, and Lily will be returned to you, unharmed. But if you continue," the threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear as day. If I kept pushing, if I kept digging, Lily would pay the price. The thought of my little girl suffering at the hands of these people, of her becoming another lost soul in their twisted game, was too much to bear. But then, another thought crept into my mind. If I backed down, if I walked away, how could I live with myself? I had seen too much, uncovered too many horrors. I knew that if I let them win, they would continue their operations, stealing more children, destroying more lives. Could I really live with that on my conscience? "I want proof," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I want to see that she's alive." The line went silent for a moment, and then the voice spoke again, colder than before. "You're in no position to make demands, Kevin. But since we're feeling generous, we'll send you something to reassure you." The call ended abruptly, leaving me sitting in the dark, the silence of the room pressing down on me. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A new message. I opened it, and my heart shattered all over again. It was a video, just a few seconds long. Lily was sitting in a small, dimly lit room, her hands bound in front of her. She looked tired, scared, but she was alive. The camera zoomed in on her face, and she mouthed a single word. "Daddy." The screen went black, and I nearly dropped the phone. They had her. She was alive, but for how long? I spent the rest of the night in agony, torn between my duty as a father and my responsibility as a journalist. The choice was unbearable, but in the end, there was only one decision I could live with. I couldn't let these monsters win. I couldn't let them keep destroying lives, even if it meant losing everything. I made my decision just before dawn. I went to my laptop, accessed the secure files I had on the child broker, and prepared to publish everything I had. Names, transactions, evidence. It was all there, ready to be released to the world. I knew the moment I hit send, there would be no turning back. My life would be over, and Lily's fate would be sealed. But just as I was about to click the button, my phone buzzed again. Another message, this one a live feed. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, my hands shaking. The feed was grainy, but I could make out the familiar outline of a small room. And there, in the center, was Lily. She was awake, but her eyes were glassy, unfocused. A man in a suit stood beside her, holding a syringe. "This is your last chance, Kevin," the man said, his voice dripping with malice. "Walk away, or this is the last thing you'll ever see of your daughter." My finger hovered over the send button, my entire body trembling. I knew what I had to do, but the sight of Lily, her life hanging by a thread, made me hesitate. Could I really sacrifice her for the greater good? But before I could make a decision, the man in the video smiled, an eerie, knowing smile. "Time's up." He plunged the syringe into Lily's arm, and I screamed, a raw, primal sound that tore through the silence of the room. The feed went dark, and I was left staring at the screen, my heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. I was too late. I had lost everything. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, the weight of my decision crushing me. I had tried to be the hero, to save the world, but in the end, I had failed the one person who mattered most. The next few days passed in a blur. I was a shell of a man, broken, defeated. I didn't care about the story anymore, didn't care about the truth. All I wanted was my daughter back, but she was gone, lost to the shadows of the dark web. Then, one evening, I received one final message. It was a video, like the others, but this one was different. It showed Lily, but she wasn't in that small room anymore. She was outside, playing in a garden, her face serene, almost happy. A woman stood nearby, watching her, but something was off. Lily didn't seem to recognize her surroundings, didn't seem to remember anything. The video ended with a chilling message, one that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "She will never remember you, Kevin, but she will be just fine." I stared at the screen, the reality of my failure sinking in. They had won. They had taken everything from me. My career, my reputation, my daughter. And now, they were moving on to the next auction, the next child whose life would be bought and sold. I was left with nothing but the knowledge that I had failed. The world would keep turning, the powerful would remain untouched, and the child broker would continue its operations. The last thing I did before I shut down my computer for good was delete the files. All the evidence, all the work I had done, it was gone. There was no point in keeping it anymore. I was done fighting. I was done with everything. I left the city the next day, a broken man with nothing to show for his years of work. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stay, couldn't face the life I had built, knowing that it had all come crashing down around me. As I drove away, I thought about Lily, about the life she would live now. I prayed that somehow she would be okay, that she would find happiness, even if she never remembered me. But deep down, I knew that I would never be okay. I would carry the weight of my failure with me, wherever I went. And in the end, I was just another victim of the darkness, swallowed up by a world that I could never hope to understand or defeat. Story number 2. The Brain Farm, by the Curator. I never expected my life to turn out this way. When I was a kid, computers were just a hobby, a way to escape the chaos of the real world. My dad was an IT guy, and I spent most of my childhood in the glow of a monitor, surrounded by the hum of machines, while other kids were playing sports or hanging out with friends. I was in my dad's home office, learning how to code before I could even drive. My parents divorced when I was 12. My mom took off, leaving my dad and me to fend for ourselves. It was tough, But we managed. I threw myself into school, mainly the tech stuff, and got really good at it. By the time I was in high school, I was light years ahead of my peers in anything related to computers. Hacking was my way of testing the limits of what I could do. It wasn't about stealing money or causing trouble. It was about proving to myself that I could break into systems that were supposedly unbreakable. I didn't have many friends. I was the typical loner, the kid who sat in the back of the class with his headphones on, avoiding eye contact. But online, I was somebody. I was Spectre, an alias that became known in the darker corners of the web. People knew me for my skills, and I gained a reputation as someone who could get into just about anything. For a while, that was enough. After high school, I skipped college and went straight into the workforce, taking freelance gigs that paid well and kept me busy. The money was good, but it wasn't satisfying. It felt like I was wasting my potential, like there was something bigger out there that I was meant to do. That's when I started diving deeper into the dark web, searching for the thrill that had been missing from my life. It became an obsession. Staying up late, exploring the hidden corners of the internet, looking for secrets that most people didn't even know existed. The dark web was like a massive underground maze, full of twists and turns, each more dangerous than the last. But it was also where I felt most alive. One night, around 2 a.m., I came across something different. It was buried deep, hidden behind layers of encryption that would have deterred anyone else. But not me. I saw it as a challenge, a chance to prove that I was still the best. The site didn't have a name, just a cryptic string of numbers and letters that meant nothing to the untrained eye. But the security on it was tighter than anything I'd ever seen. I spent hours working my way through the layers of protection, bypassing one firewall after another. The encryption was state-of-the-art, almost military grade. Whoever set this up didn't want anyone to get in. That only made me more determined. The thought of cracking it, of getting into something so heavily guarded, sent a rush through my veins. By dawn, I'd done it. I was in. The homepage was eerily simple. Just a black screen with white text that read "Welcome to the Brain Farm." No flashy graphics, no elaborate interface. Just those cold, sterile words. There was something unsettling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know what I'd found. I clicked on the first link, which led me to a list of video files and documents. Each one was labeled with a clinical, almost robotic name. Experiment 127, Subject 342, Neural Enhancement Trials. The names alone were enough to send a shiver down my spine, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I selected one of the videos and clicked play. The screen flickered for a moment, then the video started. The video showed a man, probably in his mid-30s, strapped to a metal table. His head was shaved clean, and wires were attached to his scalp, running to a series of monitors that surrounded him. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror that was almost palpable. He struggled against the restraints, his muscles straining, but it was no use. He was completely at their mercy. The people in the room, scientists, or so they appeared, moved around him with a cold, detached efficiency. They didn't seem to care about the man's panic, his silent pleas for mercy. They were too busy preparing for whatever horrific procedure they were about to perform. One of them, a man in a white lab coat, approached with a scalpel. He pressed it against the man's scalp and began to cut. The man's screams were like nothing I'd ever heard. They were raw, animalistic, a sound born from the deepest pits of human suffering. I wanted to look away, to close the window and pretend I hadn't seen it, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the screen, horrified yet fascinated by the brutality unfolding before me. The scientists were calm, methodical as they peeled back the man's skin, exposing his skull. They drilled into it, attaching more wires directly to his brain. The man's screams turned into garbled cries as the procedure continued, and then, suddenly, his body went limp, and for a moment, I thought he was dead. But the monitors told a different story. His brain activity spiked, the readings going off the charts. Something was happening to him, something beyond comprehension. The video cut off abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my hands trembling. I had seen some messed up things on the dark web before, but this was on another level. This wasn't just violence. It was something far darker, something that felt wrong on a fundamental level. But I couldn't stop. I had to know more. I went back to the main page and started going through the documents. They were detailed logs of the experiments, written in the same cold, clinical language as the video titles. Each entry described the procedures, the side effects, the outcomes. They talked about neural enhancements, implants that could increase intelligence, enhance memory, improve cognitive functions. But the cost was horrific. Most of the subjects didn't survive the procedures. Those who did were left broken, their minds shattered beyond repair. What struck me the most was how systematic it all was. This wasn't some underground torture chamber. This was an operation, a well-oiled machine that was churning out these enhancements like products on an assembly line. And the people behind it weren't just rogue scientists. They had connections, high-level connections, government agencies, major corporations, even military contractors. The enhancements they were creating weren't just for black market buyers. They were being used for corporate espionage, political manipulation, and military applications. As I read through the files, a sense of dread settled over me. I realized that I had stumbled onto something far bigger than I could have imagined. The brain farm wasn't just a sick experiment. It was a multifaceted operation with ties to some of the most powerful people and organizations in the world. And now that I had found it, I was in deep, but I wasn't about to let it go. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit by and let this continue. I decided to gather all the evidence I could and expose the brain farm for what it was. I thought I could bring them down, maybe even save some lives. But as I would soon discover, I was in way over my head. In the days that followed, I became obsessed. Every waking moment was spent digging deeper into the brain farm, uncovering more and more of its horrors. I scoured the site, downloading every document, every video, every piece of evidence I could find. I set up a secure, encrypted server to store the data, knowing that I was dealing with something that could get me killed if the wrong people found out. The more I uncovered, the more terrified I became. The experiments documented in the files were beyond anything I could have imagined. They weren't just enhancing neural functions. They were creating something entirely new. These implants didn't just boost intelligence or memory. They rewired the brain, altering the very essence of what made someone human. The side effects were gruesome. Subjects who survived the procedures often descended into madness, their minds unable to handle the unnatural changes. Some developed extreme paranoia, others violent tendencies, and some were left in catatonic states, their minds trapped in endless loops of torment. But it wasn't just the science that scared me. It was the reach of the brain farm. The more I followed the trail, the more I realized just how far their influence extended. They had ties to major tech companies, pharmaceutical giants, even politicians. It was clear that this wasn't just some underground operation. It was a global conspiracy, with fingers in every pie you could think of. I tried reaching out to the authorities, but every attempt was met with dead ends. It was like the brain farm didn't exist, like it was a ghost that left no trace. I sent anonymous tips to various law enforcement agencies, but nothing came of it. I even tried contacting journalists, but they either didn't believe me or were too afraid to touch the story. The deeper I dug, the more isolated I became. It felt like I was shouting into a void with no one listening. But I wasn't about to give up. If the authorities wouldn't act, I would. I knew the risks, but I couldn't live with myself if I just walked away from this. These people, they were monsters, and someone had to stop them. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started tracking down the people involved, using every trick I knew to uncover their identities and expose them. It wasn't easy. These weren't amateurs. They knew how to cover their tracks. But I was determined. I spent days, weeks even, following digital breadcrumbs, piecing together clues, hacking into secure networks, and decrypting files. It was exhausting, but I was fueled by a mix of fear and anger. I couldn't let these people get away with what they were doing. I started compiling a dossier, a massive file with everything I'd uncovered. Names, dates, connections, everything. My plan was to leak it to the public, to put it out there where the brain farm couldn't control it. I thought that if enough people knew, if the information went viral, then maybe something would finally be done. I imagined the headlines, the public outrage, the investigations. I thought I could bring them down, but I had no idea what I was up against. As I got closer to finishing the dossier, strange things started happening. It began with minor glitches. My computer would freeze for a few seconds. Files would disappear and then reappear. My connection would drop randomly. At first, I thought it was just technical issues, but then it got worse. My system started behaving erratically. Commands wouldn't execute properly, programs would crash, and my antivirus kept flagging files as corrupted, even though they weren't. I knew enough about cybersecurity to recognize that this wasn't just a technical problem. Someone was messing with me. They had somehow infiltrated my system, despite all the precautions I'd taken. It scared the hell out of me. Whoever was behind the brain farm, they were watching me, and they were getting closer. One night, as I was going through the files for the 100th time, I noticed something strange. A file I didn't recognize, one I was sure I hadn't downloaded, appeared on my desktop. It was labeled Protocol Z. My heart skipped a beat. I knew I shouldn't open it, that it was probably a trap, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it, and the screen went black. For a few seconds, nothing happened. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then, a single line of text appeared. "We've been expecting you, Ethan." My blood ran cold. They knew who I was. They knew my name. Panic set in. I tried to close the file, but my computer wouldn't respond. The text disappeared, replaced by a video feed. It was grainy and distorted, but I could make out the scene. A dark room, dimly lit, with a man sitting in a chair, his head slumped forward. I recognized him immediately. It was the same man from the first video I had watched on the Brain Farm site. Except this time, he wasn't screaming. He was smiling. Something dead and hollow. He looked directly at the camera, at me, and said in a voice that sent chills down my spine, "Welcome to the farm." The screen flickered, and the video cut off. My computer shut down completely. and no matter what I did, it wouldn't turn back on. I sat there in the dark, my mind racing. They had found me. They knew who I was, and now they were coming for me. I had no idea what to do. I felt like a hunted animal, cornered and out of options. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every distant car horn made me jump. I felt like they were right outside, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By morning, I was exhausted, but my fear had turned into determination. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. I packed up what I could, my laptop, hard drives, anything with data on it, and left my apartment. I couldn't stay there. It wasn't safe. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, paid in cash, and holed up there. I spent the next few days trying to rebuild my system, using the backups I had stashed on a remote server. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late, that they were already in my head. Then the headaches started. They came out of nowhere, sharp and intense, like someone was driving a spike through my skull. I'd never had migraines before, but these were worse than anything I could have imagined. They'd hit without warning, leaving me doubled over in pain, my vision swimming. At first, I thought it was just the stress, the lack of sleep catching up with me. But then the other symptoms started. Memory lapses. I'd be in the middle of something, and suddenly I couldn't remember what I was doing. Whole chunks of time would disappear, minutes, sometimes hours. I'd find myself in places I didn't remember going to, doing things I didn't remember starting. And then there were the hallucinations. At least I think they were hallucinations. I'd see things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, faces in the mirror that weren't mine, strange patterns of light dancing on the walls. It felt like I was losing my mind, and maybe I was. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just stress. It wasn't just paranoia. It was them. The brain farm. They had done something to me. I was sure of it, but I had no proof, no way to fight back. All I could do was try to finish what I'd started before it was too late. As the days passed, the symptoms grew worse. The headaches were almost constant now, a dull, throbbing pain that never seemed to go away. My memory was like Swiss cheese, full of holes where entire days used to be. I tried to stay focused, to keep working on exposing the brain farm, but it was getting harder and harder to concentrate. The more I tried to push through the pain, the more it felt like my brain was betraying me. Then came the nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams where I was strapped to that same metal table I'd seen in the videos. I could feel the cold steel beneath me, hear the whir of the machines, smell the antiseptic in the air. The scientists would gather around me, their faces hidden behind masks, their voices distorted and mechanical. They'd talk about me like I wasn't even there, discussing my brain, my neural networks, the modifications they were planning to make. The worst part was the paralysis. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but lie there and watch as they cut into me, opened my skull, and started messing with my brain. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the sensation of the scalpel still fresh in my mind. It felt so real, like it was really happening. One night, after waking from one of these nightmares, I realized something terrifying. The dreams. They weren't just dreams. They were memories. Somehow, somewhere, they had gotten to me. They had done something to me, implanted something in my brain, just like they had with their other victims. And now, they were controlling me. I spent hours after that, trying to piece it all together. The memory lapses, the headaches, The hallucinations. They were all signs. Signs that the implant was taking over, that my mind was no longer my own. I tried to fight it, to stay in control, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. The more I resisted, the stronger it became. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe me. And even if they did, they were probably in on it. I couldn't go to a doctor. They'd just think I was crazy. I was completely alone, fighting a battle I knew I couldn't win. But I had to keep going. I had to try. I focused on the dossier, the one thing that could still bring the brain farm down. It was my last hope, the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. I worked day and night, pushing through the pain, the confusion, the terror. I knew I didn't have much time left. The implant was taking over, and soon I wouldn't be myself anymore. I was so close, so damn close to finishing it. But then, just as I was about to upload the final files, it happened. My mind, it just shut down. One moment, I was staring at the screen. The next, everything went black. When I came to, I was in a different place, a different state, even. I had no memory of how I got there, no idea how much time had passed. All I knew was that the implant had taken control. I woke up in a dingy motel room, the kind of place you only stay in when you have no other options. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the daylight, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew and stale cigarettes. My laptop was open on the small, rickety table beside the bed, the screen filled with lines of code I didn't recognize. My hands were on the keyboard, typing away, but it wasn't me who was doing it. I could feel the movements, but I had no control over them. It was as if my body had become a puppet, and someone else was pulling the strings. Panic surged through me as I tried to stop, to pull my hands away from the keyboard, but they wouldn't obey. The lines of code kept appearing on the screen, faster and faster. A tangled mess of commands and protocols that I couldn't make sense of. I could feel my heart racing, sweat dripping down my forehead, but my body continued on as if it was on autopilot. I forced myself to look at the screen, to try and understand what was happening. The code. It wasn't just random gibberish. It was something more. A program. A sequence of commands designed to execute a specific task. I watched in horror as the lines of code started to form a pattern, a structure that slowly, they were rewriting me. It wasn't just an implant. It was a complete reprogramming of my mind, my thoughts, my memories, my very identity. They were all being overwritten, replaced by something else. I could feel it happening, feel my sense of self slipping away, piece by piece. The memories I had fought so hard to hold on to were fading, becoming distant echoes in the back of my mind. The implant was erasing me, replacing me with something new, something obedient. I tried to fight it, to scream, to do anything to break free, but my body refused to listen. The fear was overwhelming, a suffocating wave that threatened to drown me. I could feel myself being pushed further and further into the dark corners of my mind, trapped in a place where I had no control. It was like watching a movie of my own life, but I was no longer the one playing the lead role. The lines of code finally stopped, the screen going blank as my hands moved away from the keyboard. I could feel a momentary sense of relief, as if the worst was over, but deep down, I knew it was just the beginning. The real horror was what would come next. I stood up from the chair, my movements smooth and deliberate, but they weren't mine. I walked to the bathroom, my feet moving of their own accord, and stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror. The face staring back at me was mine, but the eyes were different. They were cold, emotionless, devoid of any spark of life. I could see the faint outline of the implant beneath the skin, a tiny, almost invisible scar running along my temple. I tried to scream, to shout, to do anything to break the silence, but no sound came out. My body was no longer my own. I could feel the implant's influence spreading, a dark fog seeping into every corner of my consciousness, erasing what was left of me. And then, just when I thought I would lose myself completely, I felt something. A flicker of resistance, a small spark deep within my mind, fighting against the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to give me hope, to remind me that I was still in here somewhere, still fighting. I latched onto that spark, focused all my energy on it, trying to push back against the implant's control. It was like trying to move a mountain with my bare hands, but I refused to give up. I could feel the implant fighting back, trying to snuff out the spark, but I held on, refusing to let it win. A sharp pain shot through my head, blinding me with its intensity. I stumbled backward, clutching my head, trying to hold on to the spark of resistance, but it was slipping away, drowning in a sea of darkness. I could feel myself fading, my thoughts becoming disjointed, fragmented. The implant was winning, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I fell to the floor, my vision blurring as the pain intensified. I could hear a voice, distant and distorted, whispering in my mind. It wasn't my voice. It was something else, something cold and mechanical. It told me to let go, to surrender, to accept what I had become. It promised that the pain would end, that I would find peace if I just stopped fighting. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Even as the darkness closed in around me, even as my mind fractured into 1,000 pieces, I refused to let go. I held onto the last remnants of my identity, the last fragments of who I was, clinging to them with everything I had. But there was one last thing I could do. With the last bit of strength I had, I crawled back to the laptop, pulling it onto my lap. My hands were shaking, my vision blurred, but I forced myself to focus. I had to finish what I'd started. I had to upload the dossier, get the information out there before it was too late. It was the only chance I had left to expose the brain farm, to make sure the world knew what they were doing. I opened the file, my fingers trembling as I typed in the final commands. The screen flickered, the upload beginning, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. But then the screen went black again, the laptop shutting down completely. I stared at it, disbelief and despair washing over me. They had stopped me. They had won. I don't remember much after that. It's all a blur, fragments of memories that don't quite fit together. I remember running. I remember the fear, the constant, gnawing fear that I would never be free, that they would find me, drag me back to whatever hell they had created for me. But I kept moving, kept running, driven by some deep, primal instinct to survive. I don't know how long I ran, how far I got, but eventually I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff, the ocean crashing against the rocks below. I stood there for a long time, staring out at the water, feeling the wind on my face, the salt in the air. And then I made a decision. I couldn't let them take everything from me. I couldn't beat them. I would at least deny them the satisfaction of victory. I took one last deep breath, closed my eyes, and stepped off the edge. For a moment, there was nothing but the sensation of falling, the wind rushing past me, the weightlessness of free fall, and then nothing. This is the Curator. I hope you've enjoyed today's scary stories. Until next time.